At first, they called it the red fever. Early symptoms were mild low-grade fever, headache, vomiting almost like the seasonal flu. But within 48 hours, the infected began to change. Their eyes turned a bloody red as tiny blood vessels burst. Their skin went pale, then shifted to a cold grey. In a clip that spread online, before the authorities wiped it from all servers, a man stood in the middle of a street, drooling, hands contorted, screaming in something no longer human. The entire neighborhood froze in shock. Then he lunged and bit a woman nearby, like a cornered animal. No one could believe what they were seeing. But that was only the beginning. Within a week, hospitals overflowed. No antiviral made any difference. No lockdown orders arrived in time. And then people started whispering about secondary mutations. The disease didn't just drive victims mad, it reshaped their bodies. Victims began to sprout bony spikes from their joints, their torn skin peeling away to reveal coffee-colored muscle that throbbed unnaturally, yet still moved. They reanimated not as the slow, shuffling dead seen in movies, but as swift, feral creatures capable of climbing walls and detecting sound or light from hundreds of meters away. The first quarantine zones were sterilized by the authorities, literally. Drones sprayed incendiary chemicals that incinerated entire neighborhoods. But some of those mutated creatures still escaped. They adapted, learned to hide, and split into packs. Then one stormy night, a substation in the north was destroyed. The entire district plunged into darkness. In that darkness, they multiplied. No one knew where the virus came from. A failed laboratory experiment, an ancient organism thawed from melting ice, or something that had been patiently waiting for humanity to let it loose. But one thing became horrifyingly clear. Humankind was no longer at the top of the food chain. Within days of the initial outbreak, it became clear that these were not ordinary zombies. The red fever virus carried a horrifying agenda of transformation. Instead of rotting shamblers, the infected underwent grotesque mutations, each more unpredictable than the last. As soon as 48 hours passed after infection, victims' skin peeled back in ragged sheets, revealing mottled muscle that throbbed and twitched. Bone spurs erupted through joints, sharp, ivory-colored spikes protruding from elbows, knees, and shoulders. Some spikes connected to form natural blades, slicing through flesh with each convulsive movement. Eyes, once human, turned blood red and bulbous, granting heightened night vision. A handful of infected even sprouted rudimentary wings, leathery membranes stretching from collarbone to waist, enabling short, terrifying glides between rooftops. These mutants no longer relied solely on sight or sound. The virus rewired their brains, heightening their ability to detect vibration and scent. A single drop of blood in a flooded street could draw a swarm from blocks away. Mutants in collapsed tunnels sensed survivors through echoes and subsonic vibrations, attacking with surgical precision. Houses with boarded windows became death traps as the infected learned to use touch and smell to locate trapped humans. Molten flames, once a deterrent, barely slowed them. Some mutants exhibited charred skin that reformed within minutes, revealing stronger, obsidian black flesh beneath. Gunshots that shattered bone triggered an immediate healing response. Shattered limbs knit back together in warped, jagged forms, telescoped bones twisting into deadly claws. A single bite from these creatures could introduce infections that turned victims into new mutants within a day. Intelligence also began to emerge. Early-stage mutants moved in erratic packs, but later generations coordinated hunts, using makeshift signals, cries, clicks, even guttural whistles to herd survivors toward ambushes. They built nests of discarded clothing, dragging corpses into hidden corners to decompose into nutrient-rich sludge the virus seemed to prefer. These macabre nests became viral breeding grounds, each corpse a laboratory for further mutation. The world stood on the brink as these nightmares evolved. With every nightfall, The mutants' twisted forms and cunning tactics advanced their reign of terror, proving that this was no simple outbreak, but the dawn of a new, predatory species. As the days wore on, it became chillingly obvious that the mutants were not static monstrosities. Their mutations continued to accelerate, splintering into distinct breeds, each more dreadful than the last. Humanity watched in terror as these new forms emerged, confirming that the virus's only purpose was relentless adaptation and devastation. The first offshoot, known colloquially as stalkers, maintained a humanoid frame, but became unnervingly lean. Their elongated limbs, spine-thin arms, ending in razor-sharp bone talons, could stretch unnaturally long, allowing them to slash through doors or grab unsuspecting prey from a distance. Their jaws split wider than any humans, revealing rows of needle-like teeth capable of puncturing armor. Under flickering street lamps, survivors reported seeing them slide into view with an almost serpentine grace, as though the darkness itself guided their approach. Next came the burrowers, mutants so altered that they abandoned bipedal movement entirely. Their torsos elongated horizontally, spines bending until they slithered like grotesque serpents. Their forelimbs fused into thick, shovel-like claws, enabling them to tunnel through earth and debris with horrifying speed. Entire basements became death traps when these creatures emerged from floorboards, silent, slimy, and arms raised for a sudden, fatal strike. Burrowers adapted to feed on both carrion and living prey, sometimes unearthing survivors hiding in sewers or storm drains. A terrifying mutation manifested as the spore spawn. These mutants stood relatively still, but bloated outward, swollen with pustules that burst to release thick, blackish spores in a toxic cloud. Survivors downwind found themselves coughing up dark phlegm within minutes. The spores quickly infiltrated lungs, altering healthy humans into mindless carriers of the virus's next wave. Entire neighborhoods fell silent after a single spore spawn appeared on a rooftop, its pustules rupturing in a slow, inevitable spray. The air itself became a weapon. Perhaps the most bewildering evolution was the emergence of the echoes, mutants that no longer attacked in mere physical ways, but employed sound as prey control. Their vocal cords had mutated into resonant chambers, capable of mimicking the cries of children, desperate pleas for help, or even the voice of a survivor's loved one. Survivors lured by familiar voices stumbled into traps, only to discover the horrid, grinning face of an echo root in the darkness. These creatures operated in packs, coordinating haunting choruses that disoriented and paralyzed victims long enough for a fatal ambush. Every sunrise delivered grim intelligence about another grotesque variant. Urban legends spread of the Bone Brute, a towering mutant with exoskeletal plating, able to shrug off most bullets, and the Whipfang, which possessed a long, whip-like tail tipped with a scythe of fused bone. Reports trickled in, a skitter swarm, where dozens of miniature mutants cluster like insects to overwhelm a lone human. An iron jaw, whose mouth had fused into a steel-hard beak, crushing anything that wandered too close. These new strains thrived in different environments. Some preferred burning furnaces of destroyed factories. Others lurked in the flooded subway tunnels, and still more abandoned themselves to perch upon high-rise rooftops, hunting by glinted moonlight. As the virus evolved, so too did the landscape. Entire city blocks were declared no man's land, the air reeking of rot and sulfur. Any attempt to map these mutants' roaming grounds was futile. They reorganized overnight, building totemic mounds of smashed cars, debris, and human entrails, a macabre monument to their ever-changing power. By the end of the third week, it became starkly clear that the outbreak was not waning, but accelerating toward an even more grotesque horizon. The boundaries between each breed blurred as genetic material exchanged freely among mutants, blurring lines of distinction. The only certainty was that these creatures were no longer mere victims of a plague. They were a new apex species, designed to replace humanity through unrelenting mutation and terror. When the 4th week of the outbreak arrived, it felt as though night never truly receded. The city, once a landscape of glass and steel, lay in ruined shadows writhed where skyscrapers once gleamed, and silence carried tremors of unseen horrors. Humanity's numbers had dwindled to sparse pockets of survivors, each corner of civilization held by brittle alliances that disintegrated under the relentless onslaught of ever-mutating abominations. Survivor enclaves, former safe zones guarded by makeshift barricades and desperate vigilance, fell one by one. Tactical teams armed with automatic rifles and Molotov cocktails discovered the mutants had learned to anticipate their movements. Stalkers lurked atop collapsed overpasses, slashing through unsuspecting fighters. Spore spawn huddled in sealed ventilation shafts, releasing clouds of black spores that suffocated entire platoons before they realized the danger. Burrowers erupted from shattered sewers, toppling motorized supply convoys like swarms of subterranean demons. Echoes lured survivors into darkened tunnels with the cries of missing comrades, only to claim their bones for twisted totems. In less than 72 hours, the great hospital complex, once a beacon of hope, became a tomb sealed in ash and gore, its corridors echoing with the final moans of those who thought they were safe. Amid this apocalyptic descent, a final breed emerged, one transcending physical mutation. The absorbers appeared without warning, mutants so perfected by the virus that they needed neither flesh nor blood. Their bodies devolved into viscous shadows, capable of passing through solid walls, their form as fluid as ink dropped into water. When an absorber enveloped a survivor, the victim's screams were swallowed whole, and their memories, their very essence, were drawn into this living nightmare. It was as if the virus's aim had shifted from simple predation to total assimilation, not merely transforming bodies, but erasing souls. A desperate resistance attempt unfolded in the city's heart, an industrial complex where miles of dormant freight trains formed a barricade. Survivors gathered from every shattered burrow, engineers, scavengers, ex-military, even the adapted hybrids rumored to straddle both worlds. They planted explosives along key choke points, rigged abandoned tanks with makeshift flamethrowers, and prepared for a siege that might grant the remainder a chance at escape. As dusk settled, the mutants' shrill cries crescendoed like a storm unbound. The ground convulsed with the footsteps of countless fiends converging on the compound. For 10 harrowing minutes, gunfire, screams, and explosions filled the air. Flamethrowers licked at the advancing burrowers, and shotgun blasts scattered stalkers from the barricades, but the tide was inexorable. An absorber slipped through a fractured wall, materializing in the heart of the defenders. In that instant, the survivors' final line shattered. One by one, they were consumed until only a handful remained, clutching desperate grenades as their last defiance. Nightfall arrived not with darkness, but with a sickly crimson glow. Fires consumed every collapsed tower, transforming the sky into a tapestry of ash and embers. The absorbers drifted through the carnage, absorbing the dying's memories, witnesses to writers scribbling final letters, mothers whispering lullabies to their children's corpses, engineers murmuring formulas for a cure that never came. Each soul added depth to the absorber's collective consciousness, forging an intellect born of humanity's last thoughts. When dawn broke, it found the compound eerily silent. Only the absorbers remained, bodies dissolving into mist as they traversed the silent streets, redistributing themselves into new clusters, seeking fresh memories to assimilate. And so, in this bleak wasteland, where the wind carried whispers of bones and the sky wept ash, humanity's brief chapter closed. In its place rose a world reimagined, one ruled by the unending hunger of mutants born from our own hubris. A final coda in the story of life on Earth, one not of triumph, but of mutation, terror, and silent dusk.
And that concludes the video for What If Mutant Zombies, a terrifying scenario where humanity faces extinction by creatures that were once human. now become uncontrollable nightmares. Thank you for watching until the end. If you find this video interesting, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss other strange, creepy and surprising stories in the upcoming What If series. Leave a comment below if you have ideas for the next scenarios. I will read them all. See you in the next video.